The unexpected discomfort. At first, it seemed like a funny little quirk. A dog growling at a new nanny. It was certainly odd, but surely just a misunderstanding. That was the mindset of Sarah and John when they first noticed their golden retriever, Bella, acting strangely around their new nanny, Emily. Bella had always been a gentle soul, a friendly and affectionate dog who adored company. Whenever someone knocked at the door, she would rush to greet them, wagging her tail furiously and almost leaping into their arms. But something about Emily brought out a different side of her. In the beginning, it didn't seem like much to worry about. Bella would growl softly whenever Emily entered the room, but no one thought much of it. Perhaps she was just getting used to a new person in the house. It wasn't uncommon for dogs to be a little territorial or uneasy around unfamiliar faces. After all, Emily was new, and it had only been a few days since she'd started taking care of their baby, Lucas. But as the days passed, Bella's behavior became harder to ignore. Every time Emily would walk past her, Bella would stop what she was doing and stare at her with intense eyes. The growls grew more frequent and louder, and sometimes Bella would position herself protectively between Emily and the baby, her fur standing on end. It wasn't like Bella to be aggressive, especially not towards someone she didn't know. But it was clear that she was uneasy around Emily, and no one could figure out why. At first, Sarah tried to reassure herself. She's probably just getting used to a new routine, she thought, but the doubt lingered in her mind. Maybe Bella just needed some time to adjust. After all, she had never shown signs of aggression towards anyone before. But as the weeks went by, the growling didn't stop. It only grew more persistent. Bella was behaving like she was trying to protect Lucas, like she sensed something wasn't right. Sarah felt embarrassed at times when she would scold Bella for growling. It seemed so out of character for her sweet dog. She would tell Bella, "It's all right, Bella. She's just here to help us." But deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Bella's growls didn't feel like mere discomfort. They felt like warnings. Meanwhile, Emily seemed completely unaware of what was happening. She would laugh it off nervously whenever Bella growled, flashing a strained smile and shrugging it off. "Maybe she just doesn't like me," Emily would say, trying to make light of the situation. But Sarah noticed something in Bella's eyes when she looked at Emily. It was as if Bella was seeing something that no one else could. Something unsettling, something that made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. In the quiet moments when she would watch Emily interacting with Lucas, Sarah began to feel a growing sense of unease. Emily was gentle with the baby, always smiling and offering sweet words to him. But Bella was watching from the corner of the room, her eyes fixed on Emily, her growl barely audible, yet unmistakable. It was as though Bella was trying to tell Sarah something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As the weeks went by, the tension in the house grew. Bella's protectiveness seemed to escalate, and Sarah found herself feeling more and more on edge every time she left the house and left Emily alone with Lucas. She trusted her nanny. After all, she had great references, and she was kind and responsible, but Bella's behavior couldn't be ignored. It was as if the dog was warning her about something she couldn't yet understand. Sarah didn't want to jump to conclusions. She didn't want to believe that something could be wrong with Emily. But Bella's growls were persistent, and the unease in the air was undeniable. Something was wrong, and Sarah knew deep down that she needed to trust Bella's instincts, even if it was hard to admit. The shifting routine. As the days passed, Sarah couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort that had settled in her home. What had once seemed like an innocent quirk of Bella's behavior, her repeated growling at Emily, had slowly turned into something more ominous. It wasn't just that Bella seemed uneasy around the nanny anymore. It was the way the dog's eyes would narrow whenever Emily entered the room, the way her posture stiffened, as if she was preparing for something. Bella had always been a calm dog, especially with strangers, so the change in her demeanor felt so out of place. But still, Sarah tried to keep her worries at bay. Emily was, after all, a highly recommended nanny who had passed all the background checks and had worked with families before. She seemed caring and attentive, and Lucas always smiled whenever she was around. The baby was growing so quickly, laughing, crawling, reaching for objects. Yet, despite the joy of seeing him develop, there was an undercurrent of tension Sarah couldn't shake. Bella, in her own way, was trying to communicate something, and Sarah wasn't sure whether it was a sign of protection or something more sinister. One afternoon, Sarah returned home a bit earlier than usual. She hadn't expected to return until later in the day, but something compelled her to change her plans. As she entered the front door, she immediately noticed that Bella was acting even more peculiar than usual. The dog was pacing back and forth in the hallway, her eyes darting between Sarah and the nursery door. "Bella, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, bending down to rub the dog's ears. Normally, Bella would have immediately come to greet her, tail wagging and body relaxed. But today, she was distant, fixated on something that Sarah couldn't see. Inside the nursery, she could hear Lucas' usual giggles, but the sound was faint. Something was off. Sarah pushed open the door quietly, finding Emily sitting in the corner of the room, watching Lucas as he napped in his crib. "Hi, Sarah. You're home early," Emily said, looking up with a bright smile. But Sarah couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that flooded over her. There was something about Emily's expression that didn't seem entirely natural. It was almost like a forced cheerfulness, as if she was trying too hard to make the situation seem normal. "Everything okay with Lucas?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. "Oh, he's just been really tired today," Emily said, standing up slowly. "He was a little fussy earlier, but I think he's finally settled." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Lucas had always been an active baby, never staying still for long periods unless he was deeply content. And yet, today, he was sound asleep, his body motionless in his crib. His breathing was slow and steady, but it felt too deep, too heavy for someone who was just a few months old. Sarah took a step closer to the crib, her heart beginning to race. She watched him for a few more moments, her intuition telling her that something was wrong. His cheeks were pale, almost too pale, and there was a slight puffiness around his eyes. Sarah bent down and gently placed a hand on his forehead. His skin felt warm, but not feverish. She hesitated for a moment, but the strange sense of unease kept growing. Something wasn't adding up. "That's strange," Sarah muttered to herself. "He's usually awake by now. He always fusses around this time." Emily's smile faltered just a little, her nervousness creeping into her voice. "Maybe he's just exhausted today. He's had a long morning." But Sarah wasn't convinced. Bella's growling had never been this persistent before. The dog, who had been pacing and watching the door, now stood rigidly near the crib, staring intently at Emily. Her fur was bristling, and her eyes seemed locked on the nanny, who was now visibly uncomfortable. Something wasn't right. As Sarah took another step closer to Lucas, Bella suddenly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. The growl that had once been a low rumble was now unmistakable, sharp, protective. Bella's stance was firm, as if she was warning Sarah to stay back. "Bella, it's okay," Sarah said softly, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring more, herself or the dog. She had always trusted Bella's instincts, but this was different. It wasn't until the following days that Sarah began to piece together the puzzle that had been forming in front of her eyes all along. Small things kept adding up. Lucas sleeping for longer periods than usual, missing feedings, and even Bella's refusal to leave the baby's side. The dog would bark and growl whenever Emily was in the room, but it wasn't until that fateful day when Sarah returned home early that everything changed. The feeling of dread was palpable now. It wasn't just Bella that Sarah was beginning to fear. It was the feeling that her instincts had been trying to tell her something all along, and she had been too blinded by trust to listen. Something wasn't right with Emily. Something far darker than Sarah had imagined. The events that followed would change everything, and the once peaceful home would never be the same again. The unseen protector. It was a quiet evening when the truth finally hit Sarah with the force of 1,000 unspoken words. She'd been walking through the house with the weight of uncertainty heavy on her chest, but as the clock ticked on, something in her gut told her tonight would be different. Tonight, she would find the answer to everything that had been troubling her for weeks. Sarah had come home earlier than usual again, and this time, the unsettling feeling in her stomach grew stronger. She didn't even take off her shoes before she heard it. The low, guttural growl from the direction of the nursery. It wasn't just a warning. It was the kind of growl that came from deep within Bella's soul. A growl that spoke of fear, of protection, of something far more dangerous than just discomfort. It was as if the dog knew something Sarah was too afraid to admit to herself. The house felt eerily quiet, but there was no mistaking it. Bella's growl echoed down the hallway, a sound so primal and protective that it sent a shiver up Sarah's spine. Sarah's heart raced as she turned toward the nursery, her hand shaking slightly as she pushed open the door. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Lucas, the baby she had nurtured with so much love, was asleep in his crib, too deeply asleep. His little chest rose and fell with a slow, almost labored rhythm. But it wasn't the baby that grabbed her attention. It was Emily, standing by the crib with a glass of something in her hand. There was a strange, unsettling smile on her face, one that Sarah had never seen before. Emily looked over at Sarah with wide, nervous eyes, as though trying to make everything seem normal again. "Hi, Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the strained look on her face was impossible to ignore. "Lucas was so tired, I thought I'd help him get some rest." Sarah's mind raced, but it was Bella's growl that anchored her, as if telling her to listen, to see what was really happening. The dog's instincts had never been wrong, and now it seemed like everything was starting to fall into place. Without thinking, Sarah rushed over to Lucas' crib and, in a moment of sheer panic, grabbed the bottle that Emily had been holding. The liquid inside was faintly bitter, an unpleasant taste that Sarah instantly recognized. The memory hit her like a freight train, the taste of sleeping pills, something she had unwittingly tasted herself once in the past when a friend had offered them to help her sleep. That same taste, that same familiar bitterness, now tainted the air in the nursery. Her heart stopped. Her hands shook violently as she turned to Emily, whose nervous demeanor was now replaced with something darker, something desperate. The smile that had seemed so innocent now twisted into something far less human. "What did you do to him?" Sarah's voice was a trembling whisper, but the anger behind it was clear. Bella's growl grew louder, a warning, a cry for help. The dog's fur was standing on end, her body tense, every inch of her being focused on protecting Lucas. Emily stepped back, her eyes darting toward the door, but she didn't move. Her hands were shaking now, her face pale. "He cried too much," she said softly, almost as though she were trying to justify herself. I thought it would help." He wouldn't stop. The weight of what Emily had done crushed down on Sarah all at once. The nanny, the woman she had trusted to care for her baby, had been drugging him to keep him asleep, to keep him quiet. She had been using the pills to make his cries go away, to make him easier to handle. But Bella had known. Bella had sensed the danger from the moment Emily stepped into their home, and it had been the dog's growls that had been the warning, the sign that something wasn't right. With trembling hands, Sarah dialed 911. She felt the cold rush of adrenaline flood through her veins as she whispered into the phone, telling the operator everything. When the police arrived minutes later, they quickly took Emily away, and Sarah stood frozen in shock, trying to process the horror of what had nearly happened to her child. As the officers led Emily out of the house, Bella stood by Sarah's side, her head gently resting against her leg. Sarah sank to the floor, her emotions a whirlwind of relief, gratitude, and disbelief. She looked at her baby, still asleep in his crib, and then back at Bella. The dog's gaze was calm now, her body relaxed. It was as if Bella knew that her job was done. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she wrapped her arms around Bella's neck, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for saving our baby," she whispered. Bella, ever loyal, gave a soft whine and licked Sarah's cheek, her tail wagging gently. The dog's warmth was a comfort, a reminder that sometimes protection comes in the most unexpected forms. As the night settled over the house, Sarah held Lucas close, knowing that no matter what happened from this point on, Bella would always be there. The dog had seen what no one else could see, had known what no one else could know. And in that moment, Sarah realized just how much she had underestimated the power of instinct, the strength of a dog's heart, and the depth of a mother's love. Bella had been more than a pet. She had been a protector, a silent guardian watching over them all along. And as the evening passed quietly, with the sounds of Bella's gentle breathing and Lucas' soft coos, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Trusting her instincts, and the instincts of those who truly cared, had saved them all. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.